Hello, I'm Michael Westland-Rose and I'm going to show you how you can plan and prepare and structure an effective presentation. So the first thing that I'd like to get you to imagine is that all the lines that I've just put up on the screen here are going to represent all the bits and pieces of information that you might need to pass across within any one of your presentations. And you'll need to bear in mind that people are not actually listening to every single word that you say. I know it'd be nice to think that they are, but I'm afraid that's not the reality. What will actually happen is that as you work your way through your presentation, sometimes they'll be listening, sometimes you might say something and it'll set their mind thinking, and then they'll be pondering upon that point that you make and maybe thinking it through. Whilst they're doing that, they may not be listening too well to the next bit that you cover. So as you work your way through your presentation, your audience, your listeners are actually moving in and out of it. Sometimes they're with you, sometimes they're thinking. And so a way to overcome that is to apply a basic structure whereby you will tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you've told them. That's a very old adage that you can use. And it also means that you've got these three natural sections to your presentation, the top bit being the introduction, this being the main body, and this bit being the close or the summing up. So we're just going to take a look at each of those sections, starting with the introduction. And the first thing that I'm going to suggest is that you should give a clear statement of purpose. So tell your listeners what that presentation is supposed to achieve. Now this actually is your first aspect in terms of controlling what happens later on, because when you give a statement of purpose, so something that that presentation should have achieved by the time it's finished, that can help you to control questions, for instance, and that could be important in some of your presentations. The other message you want to give at the beginning is a what's in it for them message. So tell them exactly how they're going to benefit from that particular presentation. In addition to that, if you can give something of what I call a wow factor, and what I mean by that is something that just really sets their mind thinking. So it could be a quote from somebody in the know, or it could be a piece of information that maybe they just haven't thought about that's relevant to what's coming up in the presentation, or it may be your own personal example or anecdote that again really sets their minds thinking. And so that's going to really engage them at the start. Then you want to make sure that they know what's coming up, so you can give them an agenda, the key things that you're going to be covering. And again, that helps you to control things, because when you tell them what you are planning to cover, in between the lines it also says what you're not planning to cover, and again that could help you to control questions later on. There may be some occasions where you need to establish some credentials. So if you're talking to people who don't know you, then they might need to know why you're a good person to be delivering that presentation. I'm not suggesting you spend half an hour blowing your own trumpet, as it were, so it's just a few key comments about what kind of knowledge or experience you've got that's relevant to that subject matter. And then final thing you should do in the introduction is to tell them something about how you want the presentation to work. So things like the timing, how long you're going to be speaking for, when you would like to get questions. You could even put a time frame on questions so they know how many questions they're likely to be able to ask. And you could tell them whether they should or shouldn't take notes. Literally anything that you need to do that might put some control mechanisms on what happens later on. These days I find it's quite useful to ask people tactfully if they could switch off their mobiles or put them on silent so we're not interrupted in that respect. Right? So all of that is in your introduction. In the main body, I'm not going to put anything up on here for the moment, but in the main body you want to get across key messages, so emphasise those key messages as best you can. One of the best ways of doing that is to not have too many key messages. Could be that in some cases just 3 key messages would be an ideal. You can wrap up those key messages with any backup data, so it could be some stories, examples, personal anecdotes. Again, it could be a quote from somebody, it could be some analogies where you say something is a bit like something else, and that's all in addition to just your data. If it's a technical presentation, whatever technical details you need to put across, if it's a financial presentation, or the figures that you need to put across, and so forth. But just wrap it up with some other things like stories and examples and analogies, so you can actually spice up the presentation and keep people's attention going as you would go through the main body. And then when you get to the close, there's three main things I'm going to recommend that you should do. So the first one is make sure that there's a recap of all the main messages, everything that you want people to remember as and when they leave the room. So highlight those as in the close. You would also want to come back to the what's in it for them message, because you want to finish your presentation on a high note, and that will enable you to do that. There's also a strong link between the what's in it for them and any action that you want them to take. Now, I would suggest that most presentations should have an action. Now, that action might be just to memorise the information. Sometimes it's to have learnt something and then maybe apply it. Sometimes there's a recommendation, a particular course of action that you want people to take. Sometimes you want people to make a decision. You might be influencing them to give you budget for something. So most presentations there would be an action point, and I would suggest you make that absolutely clear. So you're going to have therefore a good professional close saying these are the main messages that I'd like you to take away, this is how you've benefited from listening to the presentation, and this is the action that I suggest you take. Alright, so we've looked at the opening introduction, the main body, and the close of your presentation. Tell them what you're going to tell them what you've told them.